So we've been talking a bit about basically the possibility of change, given the sort of way that you describe the ways that we're formed by the liturgies we participate in. I teach a course called Life Worth Living here in Yale College with an incredibly diverse set of students. I mean, they're all Yale undergraduates, but they're coming from all sorts of different ideological backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, no religion. They are, and many of them are asking this question genuinely wide open: what is a good life? And you help them see, we help them see sort of, oh, this is how this question's already being sort of surreptitiously answered for you by the university, by the culture at large in various ways. And that like I said, that sort of gets the skin in the game. Like, oh, well, shoot, I'm not gonna have my sovereignty taken away. I gotta choose for myself. But then the question is, how do you choose? It's like almost the next order of the problem that we're talking about. Even if I know the vision of life that I want to chase after, hard enough to get leverage on that, and ancient friendships and global conversations can help me there. What if I don't even know what vision of the good life I should be aiming at? On what grounds would I make that choice? On what grounds would I even identify the liturgy of them all and say, that's not the way I want to be, I ought to want to be formed, right? Because it's a matter of fact whether it is the way I want to be formed, but I think we're trying to ask the normative question. What's not just what do I want, what's worth wanting? It starts to feel like you're out on the Nietzsche's wide open oceans with no side of land.
Yeah, wow. What a great experience that must be, being in that class. That just
privilege of my life,
It strikes me, what an incredible privilege it is to have the opportunity to choose. And it's funny, and yet it is one of the great burdens of modernity that we autonomous creatures have to pick. And somehow we imagine that we are in a better situation than, generations before us who just sort of were immersed and caught up in communities and formed in them. And the burden of choice is real. The struggle's real. So if I think about, I don't think I have a great answer to your question because it's such a almost perennial question. But I guess if I was trying to make a case to somebody, I would say, look, okay, to be human is to give yourself over to something. I would put it, you can't not worship something.
Bob Dylan.
It
may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody.
You got to serve somebody.
Okay.
So it's not a question of whether, but which. And at that point, I guess what I want to ask myself is what or who I'm going to give myself over to someone who's given themselves for me. I mean, I guess the reason I'm a Christian is I feel like in Christianity, God calls me into a story in which God gave himself radically for the brokenness of the world. And so then what I see is what I'm called to is somebody who's borne all of the brunt of our injustice, So that's a sort of distinguishing mark of it. So that's, I don't know, maybe that's getting too specific, but it's if you start asking, okay, if I'm going to give myself over to something, what is it asking of me, and what have they given? Maybe that would be one criterion. I suppose the other way that we try to sort out these questions is exemplars, models. I imagine probably one of the most powerful levers, switches that get flipped when actually people make this choice is they see somebody who lives a way of life, and there is this beautiful allure to it that maybe they can't even entirely put into words, but you're so humbled by somebody pursuing this way of life, and then you start asking what story would move them to be like that, and now you feel this kind of like magnetic pull to that way of life. And my hunch is those are the saints of our stories, right? The exemplars that move us. And I suppose we all have kind of implicit criteria about who moves us, and thinking about exemplarity in that respect maybe is it's not necessarily articulating the criteria, but it explains the dynamics maybe.
Yeah, it sounds actually in some ways similar to what Charles Taylor says about how in the language animal he walks through some of the ways that we shift in our sort of our hyper goods or our sort of core values. He says it's first a sort of affective, subjective, you sort of can't reason your way through it, but he says what's crucially different is they're not just bare moral reactions, as David Hume would say. He says instead, no, the key difference is you can reason about them afterwards.
Yes. Right.
So what the heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind,
Yes,
last
yes,
of all,
yes,
justifies,
exactly.
I suppose.
And that doesn't make us irrational.
Right. I mean, he actually says that's a key difference. That's how you know the difference between I'm just being sort of blown by the wind, and he talks about it. The image he uses is the getting a grip on a hammer. You don't reason out like, well, if I turn my hand a little bit, the grip would feel firmer. You have to take the new grip, and then you feel whether it's firmer or not.
Yes.
Yes.
It's know-how. There's sometimes I think what happens is we imagine, because we're articulating these questions, that they are going to be settled at the know what level. But in fact, that's us just trying to make explicit what is all kinds of implicit rationality that's going on. And those aren't in tension, they're just different. They're different registers. And often I think a conversion, a change, is much more operative on the know-how level. And our narratives about it come afterwards, and it does have to be susceptible to being articulated, right? Otherwise, it is just idiosyncratic irrationality. But the fact that you can narrate a story about it and make sense of it doesn't mean that reason was the primary progenitor of your conversion, so to speak. Yeah.